12 men with Ivy League degrees and $1,000 watches stood around the king-size bed, collectively baffled. They spoke in hushed clinical terms, charting organ failure and necrosis, while the man on the mattress slowly drowned in his own fluids. They saw a complex medical mystery. Harper just saw a dying man. And as she scraped dried wax off the mahogany nightstand, keeping her head down like a good ghost, she saw the one thing 12 medical degrees had completely missed. The Costa estate didn't smell like old money anymore. It smelled like a hospital ward masquerading as a palace. For the past 3 weeks, the heavy scent of bleach, sterile wipes, and iodine had seeped into the velvet drapes and the Persian rugs. It overpowered the faint, lingering odors of cigar smoke and gun oil that usually clung to the men who occupied the first floor. Harper dragged her mop bucket down the long, dimly lit hallway of the east wing, the wheels squeaking a rhythmic, irritating protest against the Italian marble. She was 24, chronically exhausted, and intimately familiar with the scuff marks on the floorboards, because looking up in this house was a good way to get yourself fired. Or worse. 2 men in tailored black suits stood outside the master bedroom doors. They didn't look at her as she approached, but the taller one stepped sideways, blocking the mahogany double doors with a shoulder that looked like it belonged on a linebacker. "Cleaning," Harper mumbled, staring at his polished leather shoes. Her voice was raspy. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night since Gabriel Costa collapsed. The guard patted down her apron, his hands rough and entirely devoid of hesitation. He checked the hollow plastic handle of her feather duster and the inside of her mop bucket before giving a curt nod. The heavy doors swung open. The master bedroom was stiflingly hot. The air was thick, heavy, with the metallic tang of blood-stale sweat and the sharp bite of expensive cologne attempting to mask the unmistakable smell of human decay. Gabriel Costa, the head of the city's most brutal syndicate, looked nothing like the terrifying figure Harper used to see stalking through the foyer. He was drowning in white silk sheets, his skin the color of dirty ash. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat. Tubes snaked from his arms to IV bags that dripped clear fluids and thick yellow antibiotics. He was a terrifying man, a man who had supposedly ordered the disappearance of 2 city councilmen before breakfast, but right now he was just 35 pounds lighter and shivering violently in his sleep. Around him stood 3 of the 12 doctors currently on the Costa payroll. They worked in shifts, a rotating carousel of the city's most elite specialists. Today, it was a neurologist, an immunologist, and a toxicologist who had flown in from Geneva. His white blood cell count is plummeting again. The immunologist, a bald man with wire-rimmed glasses, whispered sharply. It's an aggressive autoimmune response. His body is attacking its own nervous system. You're guessing, Doctor, the neurologist countered, crossing his arms. The seizures indicate a localized cerebral infection, a parasite perhaps dormant from his time in South America. Gentlemen, look at the liver enzymes. The toxicologist sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It's systemic. It's a rapid onset neurodegenerative disorder. We need to increase the corticosteroids. They bickered like mechanics, arguing over a blown transmission. None of them looked at the man. They looked at the iPads in their hands, the printed charts, the glowing monitors. Harper squeezed her mop, the dirty water splashing into the bucket with a wet slap. She didn't care about Gabriel Costa's soul, and she certainly didn't care about his empire. She cared about her paycheck. She cared about the 3 months of back rent she owed her landlord, a man who had recently started looking at her younger sister with a cold, calculating interest. The Costa estate paid triple the going rate for domestic staff, with the silent understanding that they were blind, deaf, and mute. If Gabriel died, the syndicate would splinter. The estate would be liquidated, or burned to the ground by rivals. Either way, her job disappeared. She moved to the nightstand, taking a microfiber cloth to the water rings left by discarded crystal glasses. Gabriel let out a low, rattling breath. His chest hitched. Harper froze the cloth hovering over the wood. His eyes opened. They were a startling pale grey bloodshot and completely unfocused. For a split second, they locked onto hers. There was no recognition, no authority, just a raw animal panic. It was the look of a trapped dog chewing its own leg off. Her stomach gave a hard, ugly twist. She looked away immediately, scrubbing violently at a spot on the wood that was already clean. "Increase the lorazepam," the immunologist ordered. "He's agitated. We can't have his heart rate spiking." A nurse stepped forward, pushing a clear syringe into the IV line. Within seconds, Gabriel's eyelids fluttered, and he dragged back down into the chemical dark. Harper picked up the trash can by the bed, her knuckles white. The doctors continued to argue in circles, throwing around words like idiopathic and palliative. They had all the money in the world, all the machines, all the degrees. And they were losing him. By Tuesday, Gabriel was worse. The house felt like a held breath. The security presence doubled. Men with assault rifles now stood openly in the gardens, crushing the frost-covered hydrangeas beneath their boots. Harper was assigned to the morning shift, which meant she had to clear the breakfast trays that nobody touched. She pushed her cart into the master suite just before 8. The room was shadowed, the heavy blackout curtains drawn tight. Only 2 doctors were present this morning, sitting in the corner armchairs, drinking espresso and speaking in defeated, clipped tones. "His kidneys are failing," one muttered. 48 hours, maybe 72. You need to tell Dante to prepare the transition. Dante, Gabriel's younger brother, the heir apparent. Speak of the devil. The door opened behind her, and Dante Costa walked in. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly over his lean frame. His hair was slicked back, his expression a mask of weary, devastating grief. He carried a silver tray. On it sat a delicate porcelain teacup steam, rising in a thin, twisting ribbon. "How is he?" Dante asked, his voice thick with emotion. He walked past Harper as if she were a piece of furniture. "Drifting, Mr. Costa," the doctor replied, standing up respectfully. "We're managing his pain." "Good. That's good." Dante set the tray down on the bedside table. He reached out his hand, hovering over his brother's clammy forehead, before lightly resting his palm against Gabriel's cheek. It was a tender gesture. It made Harper's skin crawl. She didn't know why. She had no reason to suspect Dante of anything. But growing up in a house where violence was a language, you learned to recognize the subtle dialect of a predator. Dante's grief was too loud. His shoulders didn't hold the heavy, formless slump of a man losing his blood. They were rigid, coiled. "I brought his tea," Dante said, looking at the nurse. "The herbal blend from the apothecary in the city. The one he likes. It soothes his throat." "Of course, sir. I'll try to get him to take a few sips," the nurse said gently. Dante lingered for another moment, staring down at his dying brother. Then he turned on his heel and walked out, his expensive cologne lingering in his wake. Harper moved to the other side of the bed to gather the soiled towels. The nurse, a tired-looking woman with graying roots, propped Gabriel up against the pillows. He was dead weight. She picked up the teacup, blowing softly on the amber liquid, before bringing it to his pale lips. "Come on, Mr. Costa," she coaxed. "Just a little," he swallowed reflexively. "Once. Twice." A little line of tea escaped the corner of his mouth, running down his jaw. Harper reached out instinctively with a clean towel to catch it before it hit the silk sheets. As she dabbed the moisture from his chin, the the smell hit her. It was faint. The tea was heavily spiced with ginger and peppermint, designed to overwhelm the senses. But beneath it, sharp and cold, was a smell she recognized. When she was 9, she had lived in a basement apartment in the Narrows. They had a rat problem. The landlord, too cheap for an exterminator, bought industrial-grade paste from a foreign supplier. He mixed it with peanut butter and left it in the corners. Harper remembered the smell of that paste because she had almost eaten it once. It smelled exactly like bruised cherry pits and bitter almonds. Cyanide. No, not cyanide. Cyanide kills in minutes. This was slower. Her heart did a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She looked at the teacup resting on the nightstand. The silver spoon Dante had used to stir it was leaning against the saucer. She reached out to grab an empty water glass, purposefully knocking her elbow against the saucer. The silver spoon clattered onto the dark wood. "Careful," the nurse hissed, glaring at her. "Sorry," Harper mumbled, ducking her head. She picked up the spoon. Silver doesn't lie. The bowl of the spoon, where it had rested in the tea, was lightly tarnished, a subtle bluish-black film clouding the polished metal. It was a reaction to sulfur. Or something worse. Arsenic, aconite, heavy metals. Something that mimicked organ failure. Something that deteriorated the nervous system over weeks, causing seizures and wasting. Something you could slip into a strong-smelling herbal tea every single morning. Harper looked at the 12 massive medical files stacked on the mahogany desk across the room. The doctors were looking for pathogens. They were looking for genetics. They were running blood panels for exotic diseases and treating the inflammation with steroids. But you don't test for obscure heavy metal poisoning or localized botanical toxins unless you have a reason to look for it. They thought the metabolic breakdown was causing his failing organs. They didn't realize a poison was causing the metabolic breakdown. They were treating a murder like a medical condition. Her mouth went dry. The mop handle suddenly felt like a live wire in her hands. She looked down at Gabriel. His breathing was already growing shallower, the monitor beside him slowing its rhythmic beep. If she spoke up, she was a dead woman. The doctors would laugh at her. Dante would have her quietly removed from the estate, and her body would be found in the river by Tuesday. You do not accuse a Mafia underboss of fratricide. You keep your head down, you clean the floor, you take your paycheck. She gripped the cart. Not my problem, she told herself. Let the wolves eat each other. But then Gabriel's hand twitched. His fingers, bruised from IV needles, brushed against her apron. It was an accident. An involuntary muscle spasm, but the skin-to-skin contact jolted her. His hand was freezing. She thought of her sister. She thought of the landlord's heavy, wet breathing. She needed this job. She needed Gabriel Costa alive to keep the paycheck clearing. "Mom," Harper said. Her voice cracked. The nurse looked up, irritated. "What? I think the tea is cold. Let me get you a fresh cup." Before the nurse could protest, Harper grabbed the porcelain teacup. Her hand was shaking so badly, the liquid sloshed over the rim, burning her thumb. She didn't let go. She threw it directly into her trash bag, burying it under a pile of bloody gauze, and used paper towels. "What are you doing?" The nurse gasped, standing up. "Mr. Costa brought that. It had a fly in it." Harper lied her heart, hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her sternum. "I'll fetch a fresh one from the kitchen." She practically ran out of the room, pushing her cart blindly into the hallway. She was sweating through her uniform. She had just intercepted a murder weapon. Harper didn't fetch fresh tea. She hid in the linen closet on the second floor for 45 minutes, sitting on a stack of Egyptian cotton towels, trying to stop her hands from shaking. She had bought him maybe 24 hours. Dante would just poison the broth at dinner, or the water pitcher tomorrow morning. She couldn't stand guard over his diet forever. She was a maid. She swept the floors. She pressed her palms against her eyes. She had to tell someone. But who? The doctors. They wouldn't listen to a girl who scrubbed toilets for a living. The security guards they belonged to, whoever signed their checks, and right now Dante was holding the pen. She needed proof. She waited until shift change. At 2 p.m., the day doctors rotated out and the evening specialists arrived. There was a 10-minute window where the master suite was occupied only by the private nurse. Today it was a young guy named Mark who usually spent his shifts scrolling through sports betting apps on his phone. She grabbed her feather duster and slipped back into the master suite. Mark barely glanced up. "Just dusting the blinds," Harper murmured. "Yeah, whatever." "Don't unplug anything," Mark grunted, tapping his screen. She moved to the window, flicking the duster uselessly against the heavy curtains. She watched Gabriel in the reflection of the glass. He was terribly still. The monitors hummed. She needed a blood sample, or hair. Hair retains heavy metals. If she could clip a piece of his hair, maybe she could take it to a free clinic downtown, beg someone to run a tox screen. It was a stupid, desperate plan, patched together from late-night crime shows. But it was all she had. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the small, sharp sewing scissors she used to snip loose threads from the upholstery. She crept toward the bed. Mark was facing the other way, thoroughly engrossed in his phone. The room smelled like antiseptic and approaching death. She stood over Gabriel. Up close, the damage was horrifying. The skin around his eyes was sunken, the blood vessels broken and purple. He looked frail. It was impossible to reconcile this broken shell with the man who used to command rooms with just a look. She reached out her fingers, trembling, and gently grasped a small clump of dark hair near the nape of his neck. She opened the scissors. Suddenly, a hand shot out like a striking snake. Fingers like iron clamped around her wrist. The grip was shockingly strong, a burst of adrenaline from a dying nervous system. Harper gasped, dropping the scissors. They clattered onto the floor. Gabriel's eyes snapped open. They weren't unfocused this time. They were locked onto her face, burning with a feverish, terrifying clarity. "Don't," he rasped. His voice was like grinding stones, barely a whisper, but it carried absolute authority. Mark jumped up from his chair, his phone clattering to the floor. "Hey, what are you doing?" Gabriel didn't look at the nurse. He kept his hollowed, burning eyes on her. His chest heaved. He was fighting the sedatives, fighting the poison, clawing his way up from the dark, just to look at the girl holding scissors over his throat. "Mr. Costa!" Mark rushed over, grabbing Gabriel's arm. "You need to lie back!" "Get out!" Gabriel hissed. It was a wet, broken sound, but it stopped Mark dead in his tracks. "Sir, your heart rate—" "Out!" Gabriel repeated, his fingers digging harder into her wrist. The pain was sharp, shooting up her forearm. Mark looked terrified. He backed away slowly. I'll get Dr. Aris." He bolted from the room. They were alone. Harper pulled at her arm, panic rising in her throat. "Let me go, please." Gabriel didn't release her. His breathing was rapid, shallow pants. He studied her face, taking in her cheap uniform, her panicked eyes, her trembling lip. "Who," he choked out, "sent you?" "Nobody," Harper whispered, frantically looking at the door. "The doctors would be here in seconds. I'm the maid. I clean the floors." "You. Scissors." He grimaced, a spasm of pain crossing his face. His grip loosened a fraction, but he didn't let go. "I wasn't going to hurt you," Harper said, her voice cracking. Tears of pure terror pricked her eyes. "I was trying to save you, you stupid son of a bitch." The curse slipped out before she could stop it. Gabriel's eyes widened slightly. "The tea." Harper blurted out the words, rushing out in a desperate flood. "The herbal tea your brother brings you. It smells like crushed almonds and horseradish. It's tarnishing the silver spoons. You aren't sick, Mr. Costa. They're poisoning you. And the doctors are too busy looking at your liver to look at your cup." Gabriel stared at her. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic, erratic beeping of his heart monitor. Harper watched the information process in his eyes. She expected denial. She expected him to call for his guards. Instead, a slow, dark understanding settled over his features. It was a look of profound, agonizing betrayal. The fight drained out of him all at once. His grip on her wrist went slack, his hand falling back against the mattress. He closed his eyes. A single ragged sigh escaped his lips. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. The door burst open. 3 doctors and 2 armed guards flooded into the room. "Get away from him!" one of the guards barked, grabbing her by the shoulder and shoving her hard against the wall. Her head cracked against the plaster, making her vision swim. "He's tachycardic!" Dr. Aris yelled, rushing to the monitors. "Push another milligram of Ativan." "What did you do to him?" The guard snarled, pressing his forearm against her collarbone. Harper tasted copper in her mouth. She looked at Gabriel. He was lying perfectly still, letting the doctors swarm over him, letting the nurse inject the sedative into his line. "Tell them," she begged silently. "Tell them what I said." But Gabriel didn't speak. He just turned his head slightly on the pillow, his heavy eyelids drooping. Just before the drugs pulled him under his grey eyes, met hers through the chaos of white coats. He gave a barely perceptible nod. He knew. And now Harper was the only person in the world who knew he knew. Which meant her life expectancy had just dropped to 0. The guard who shoved her was named Miller. Harper knew this because his name was stitched into the breast of his tactical jacket, right at her eye level, before he dragged her by the armpit down 2 flights of stairs. The Costa estate had a basement. Of course it did. It wasn't a wine cellar and it wasn't a laundry room. It was a windowless concrete box that smelled of old dampness, rust, and copper. The kind of smell that coats the back of your tongue and stays there. Miller threw her inside. Harper hit the floor hard, scraping the skin off her palms against the rough cement. The heavy steel door slammed shut the lock, engaging with a sickening final clack. She sat in the dark for what felt like hours. The cold seeped through her thin cotton uniform, settling into her bones. Her wrist throbbed where Gabriel had gripped it. It was already turning a deep, angry purple, perfectly shaped like 4 thick fingers and a thumb. She was going to die down here. Harper curled her knees to her chest, pressing her face into her arms. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury for people who had a safety net to catch them. She just felt a hollow, exhausting dread. She thought about her sister coming home to an empty apartment. She thought about the rent money sitting in a coffee can above their fridge. Footsteps echoed outside. Heavy measured, the lock turned. The harsh glare of the hallway light flooded in, blinding her for a second. When her eyes adjusted, Dante Costa was standing in the doorway. Up close, away from the sterile lights of the medical wing, Dante was terrifying. He didn't have Gabriel's sheer, brute physical presence, but he had something worse, the polished, untouchable arrogance of a man who had never been told no. He wore a navy silk tie, perfectly dimpled. He smelled of bergamot, expensive leather, and mint. "The Maid," Dante said softly, stepping into the room. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the concrete. Miller stood silhouetted in the doorway. "I'm sorry," Harper croaked, her voice cracking. She scrambled backward until her spine hit the cold cinder-block wall. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." "Quiet," Dante said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He crouched down so they were at eye level. His eyes were the same grey as Gabriel's, but where Gabriel's were storm clouds, Dante's were just flat slate. Empty. "Dr. Orris tells me you attacked my brother with a pair of shears." Dante tilted his head. "A girl who makes $15 an hour trying to assassinate the head of the Costa family. It sounds like a bad joke." "I was snipping a loose thread," Harper lied. The lie tasted like ash, but she swallowed it down and pushed it out. "On his pillow. I saw a thread. I'm obsessive about the linens, sir. It's my job. I leaned over and he grabbed me. He woke up and grabbed me. I panicked. I dropped them." Harper let her hands shake. It wasn't hard. Her whole body was trembling. She kept her eyes wide, letting the tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. She needed him to see a pathetic, stupid girl. She needed to be entirely beneath his notice. Dante stared at her. He looked at her cheap, scuffed sneakers. He looked at the purple bruises forming on her wrist. "He's hallucinating," Dante murmured almost to himself. "The fever is cooking his brain." He stood up, brushing a microscopic speck of dust from his trousers. He looked down at her with profound disgust. "Fire her," Dante said to Miller, turning his back on her. "Search her locker. If she stole so much as a silver spoon, break her fingers before you throw her out." Relief washed over Harper so violently she almost vomited. She was getting out. She was losing the job, but she was keeping her life. She let her head fall back against the wall, dragging in a jagged breath of the stale basement air. "Sir!" A new voice echoed in the hallway. It was Dr. Orris, out of breath, his white coat flapping around his knees. He stopped just behind Miller, looking thoroughly shaken. "What is it?" "Doctor!" Dante snapped, irritated by the interruption. "It's Gabriel," Dr. Orris panted. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed his sweating forehead. He's lucid, completely lucid, and he's refusing the IVs." Dante went entirely still. The relaxed droop of his shoulders vanished. "What do you mean, refusing?" He pulled the line out of his arm. When Mark tried to reinsert it, he grabbed a surgical scalpel off the tray. He's holding it to his own throat. He says. Dr. Orris swallowed hard, looking past Dante to where Harper sat shivering on the floor. "He says he won't let anyone touch him unless the maid is in the room." Dante slowly turned around. His flat slate eyes locked onto hers. The air in the concrete room suddenly felt incredibly thin. "Which maid?" Dante asked softly. "Her," Dr. Orris said. He described her, the one with the bruises on her wrist. They didn't give her a chance to wash her hands. Miller marched Harper up the stairs by her elbow, Dante following silently behind us. The house felt entirely different now. The quiet, grieving atmosphere had shattered. Guards were whispering in the corridors, their hands resting uneasily on their holstered weapons. The king was awake, and the castle was in chaos. When they pushed her through the mahogany double doors of the master suite, the smell of bleach and decay hit her twice as hard. Gabriel was sitting up. He looked like a corpse that had been violently yanked back into its body. His chest was bare, his skin stretched taut over his ribs, slick with an unhealthy yellowish sweat. In his right hand, gripped so tightly his knuckles were white, was a small silver scalpel. A thin line of blood trickled down his forearm, where he had ripped the IV needle from his vein. 4 doctors stood in a terrified semicircle at the foot of the bed. Gabriel's eyes darted around the room. They were wild, feral, burning with a mix of agony and pure, unfiltered rage. But when Harper stumbled through the door, his gaze snapped to her and locked. "Out!" Gabriel rasped. His voice was ruined, vocal cords shredded by weeks of silence and dry air. "Gabriel, please," Dante said, stepping forward. His voice was smooth, dripping with brotherly concern. "You're having a psychotic episode." The infection. Gabriel didn't look at his brother. He pointed the scalpel directly at Dr. Aris. "Everybody out, except her." "We can't do that." "Mr. Costa," the toxicologist pleaded. "Your heart rate is 140. You're entering acute failure. You need the fluids." Gabriel pressed the flat edge of the scalpel against his own jugular. The room collectively gasped. "Out," he whispered. Dante's jaw tightened. A muscle leapt in his cheek. He was doing the math in his head. If Gabriel killed himself right here in front of 4 Ivy League doctors and the security detail, there would be an investigation, autopsies, inquiries. Dante needed Gabriel to die of a mysterious illness, not a messy suicide. "Give him what he wants," Dante said smoothly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Let him calm down. Dr. Aris, clear the room. We'll monitor him from the cameras." "Turn the cameras off," Gabriel choked out. "Or I cut." Dante hesitated. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of genuine murderous hatred. Then he nodded to Miller. "Cut the feed." Within 30 seconds, the room was empty. The heavy doors clicked shut. Harper stood near the dresser, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Gabriel's ragged, wet breathing. He slowly lowered the scalpel. His arm was shaking violently. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the crushing weight of his poisoned body. He let his head fall back against the headboard, closing his eyes. "Water," he muttered. Harper didn't move. She was rooted to the floor. I don't know if I should." His eyes snapped open. "You started this. Water." Harper hurried to the bathroom. She didn't trust the crystal pitcher by his bed. She turned on the tap, letting the cold water run over her scraped palms until it stung, then filled a clean paper cup. She brought it back to him. His hand was shaking too badly to hold it. She had to step close enough to smell the bitter metallic scent seeping from his pores. She brought the cup to his cracked lips. He drank greedily, coughing as the water hit his throat, but he swallowed it all. He sank back, his chest heaving. "What is your name?" "Harper," she whispered. "Harper." He tested the word, tasting it. "You're sure? About the tea?" "I'm sure," Harper said, her voice barely audible. "It smells like bitter almonds. The silver spoon, you stirred it with tarnished black in seconds. It's heavy metals, or botanical. Thallium," he whispered. He stared at the ceiling, a bitter, broken smile twisting his mouth. "Tasteless, odorless. Unless you mix it with the wrong herbs. He was feeding me thallium, the rat poison of the KGB. God, he's a cliché. The doctors think it's an autoimmune disease. Your hair is thinning. Your nervous system is shutting down. It matches, because they're looking for a disease." Gabriel turned his head to look at her. The vulnerability in his eyes was staggering. This was a man who ruled a criminal empire, reduced to begging a maid for tap water. How long have you been sick? How long do I have?" Harper swallowed hard. "I don't know. Days, maybe less. Your organs are failing." "I need a chelating agent," he said, his brain working sluggishly through the fog of pain. "Prussian blue, or charcoal." "I can't get that," Harper said, panic rising. "I don't have a car. The guards won't let me leave. Dante told them to fire me 10 minutes ago." "You work for me now," Gabriel said. The absolute authority in his voice was jarring, considering he could barely sit up. You don't leave this room. You don't let them put anything in my IV. You pour the tea down the drain. You pour the broth down the drain. They're going to know, Harper argued, taking a step back. If you suddenly start getting better, Dante will know I told you. He'll kill us both. Gabriel's eyes darkened. I'm not going to get better. Not quickly. The thallium is in my tissue. Without medical collation, my body has to sweat it out. Piss it out. It's going to take weeks, and it is going to hurt. He looked at his trembling hands. You have to make them believe I'm still dying, he said softly. You let them run the monitors. You let them give me the painkillers. But you stop the poison. You swap the IV bags if you have to. You hide the food. I'm a maid, Mr. Costa, not a spy. You want to live, Harper. His voice was cold now, grounded. Dante already knows you're a liability. The second I flatline, he's going to tie up loose ends. You are a loose end. Your only way out of this house alive is if I walk out of it first. He was right. Harper felt the cold truth of it settle in her stomach like a stone. Dante's slate-grey eyes in the basement hadn't looked at her as a person. They had looked at her as a chore he hadn't gotten around to finishing yet. Okay, she breathed. Okay. What do we do? Gabriel dropped the scalpel onto the silk sheets. He looked exhausted, the brief burst of manic energy completely depleted. First, he whispered, closing his eyes, you clean up the blood. Then you open the door, and you tell my idiot brother I want to sleep. The next 4 days were a master class in psychological torture. Surviving a Mafia boss's sick room wasn't about grand gestures or heroic speeches. It was about logistics. It was about the physical grinding toll of outsmarting people who had every advantage. Harper lived in the master suite. She slept in a velvet armchair in the corner, waking up every 2 hours to the sound of Gabriel dry heaving into a plastic basin. Detoxing from heavy metal poisoning without clinical intervention is a brutal, violent process. Thallium attacks the nervous system. It strips the myelin sheath from the nerves, leaving them exposed and raw. By day 2, Gabriel couldn't bear the weight of the silk sheet over his legs. Take it off, he ground out through clenched teeth, his hands gripping the bed rails so hard his knuckles bruised. She carefully pulled the sheet back. His legs were covered in a fine, cold sweat, the muscles twitching involuntarily. She took a damp, cool washcloth and gently dabbed his forehead. He flinched at the touch but forced himself to stay still. Breathe, Harper murmured, rinsing the cloth in a bowl of clean water she had smuggled in under a pile of fresh towels. Just breathe through it. He didn't speak. He just stared at the ceiling, his jaw locked tight enough to crack teeth. The sheer willpower it took him not to scream was terrifying to witness. She realized then why he was the boss and why Dante had resorted to poison. In a fair fight, Dante wouldn't have lasted 3 minutes. The hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the acting. Every morning at 8, Dante walked in with the tea. On the 3rd day, the routine hit a breaking point. Dante entered dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, carrying the silver tray. He looked rested. He looked like a man quietly measuring the drapes for his new office. How was the night? Dante asked, setting the tray on the nightstand. Harper kept her eyes on the floor, holding a feather duster. Restless, sir. He's in a lot of pain, Dante hummed softly. He poured the tea. The smell of ginger peppermint and that underlying sharp scent of bruised almonds filled the room. Her stomach turned over. Gabriel lay perfectly still, his eyes half closed, playing the part of the fading ghost. Gabriel, Dante said gently, leaning over the bed. "I brought your tea." Gabriel let out a weak groan, turning his head away. "You need to drink, brother," Dante insisted. He picked up the cup. "Come on, just a sip." Harper was standing near the dresser. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure Dante could hear it over the hum of the medical monitors. Dante moved the cup closer to Gabriel's mouth. Gabriel's lips parted, feigning weakness. If he drank it, the last 2 days of agonizing detox were for nothing. The build-up would kill him. Harper didn't think. She just moved. She took 2 steps forward, purposefully, catching the toe of her sneaker on the edge of the thick Persian rug. She pitched forward, throwing her arms out with a startled yelp. Her hand slammed directly into Dante's elbow. The porcelain cup shattered against the floor. The scalding poisoned tea splashed across Dante's polished leather shoes and soaked into the rug. "You stupid bitch!" Dante roared. He backhanded her before she even hit the ground. The heavy gold ring on his right hand caught her cheekbone. The force of the blow sent her crashing into the mahogany nightstand. Wood splintered. Pain exploded across the side of her face, sharp and blinding. She collapsed onto the floor, tasting blood instantly. The room went dead silent. Her ear was ringing. She pressed her hand to her cheek, feeling the hot, sticky swell of a deep cut. She looked up. Dante was standing over her, his chest heaving, his slate eyes burning with sudden, unfiltered violence. He raised his foot. She knew with absolute certainty he was going to kick her ribs in. "Dante!" The voice was a whisper, but it carried across the room like a gunshot. Dante froze. He looked toward the bed. Gabriel had pushed himself up on one elbow. He was shaking his skin, grey, his eyes sunken. He looked like death warmed over. But the look he was giving his brother was not weak. It was a promise. It was cold, dark, and utterly lethal. "She's clumsy!" Gabriel rasped, his chest hitching. "Leave her." Dante stared at his brother. The tension in the air was so thick, it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Dante realized he had slipped. He had let the grieving brother act drop, revealing the monster underneath, right in front of the man he was trying to replace. Dante slowly lowered his foot. He smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket, forcing his features back into a mask of calm composure. "My apologies," Dante said stiffly. "The stress. It's getting to me." He looked down at the spilled tea, then at Harper. "Clean this up. Immediately." He turned on his heel and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Harper stayed on the floor for a long moment, her hand pressed to her bleeding cheek. The smell of bitter almonds was overpowering where the tea was steaming into the rug. "Harper," she looked up. Gabriel was leaning over the edge of the bed, his hand outstretched toward her. The physical effort of moving that far was costing him dearly. His arm was trembling violently, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. She scrambled up, ignoring the throbbing in her face, and grabbed his hand. His grip was weak, but he held on, using her leverage to pull himself back to the center of the pillows. He fell back completely exhausted. His eyes closed. "Get a towel," he whispered, his voice barely working. "Soak up the tea. Put it in a plastic bag. Hide it." "Why?" Harper asked, wiping blood from her chin with the back of her sleeve. Gabriel opened his eyes. The grey irises were sharp, burning through the fever. "Because," he said softly, "when I can finally stand up, I'm going to make him drink it." Harper cut the poisoned rug out with a box cutter she stole from the maintenance closet. It was a clumsy job. She hacked a jagged 12-inch square out of the antique Persian wool, wrapped the soaking tea-stained fabric in 3 plastic garbage bags, and duct-taped it to the underside of the heavy mahogany dresser. To cover the gaping hole in the rug, she simply dragged the heavy leather armchair over it. Dante didn't notice. Dante didn't look at the floor. He only looked at the monitor, which, to his immense frustration, had flatlined its downward trajectory. Gabriel wasn't getting worse anymore. He wasn't getting better, at least not on paper, but the rapid decline had stalled. The doctors were baffled. Dr. Aris spent hours staring at his iPad, muttering about anomalous plateau phases and delayed metabolic responses. They kept pushing the IV fluids. Harper kept clamping the line when they left the room and unclamping it just before they returned. But Gabriel was starving. The estate kitchen only sent up clear broths and gelatin, designed for a dying digestive tract. Gabriel needed protein. He needed fat to bind to the residual toxins in his fat stores. He needed calories to rebuild the muscle the thallium had eaten away. Smuggling food became her second full-time job. She'd wait until 2 a.m., slip out the servant's entrance, and raid the walk-in fridge in the basement kitchen. She stuffed cold flank steak blocks of sharp cheddar and hard-boiled eggs into the deep pockets of her apron, wrapping them in paper towels to muffle the sound. The first time she brought him solid food, a piece of cold leftover roast beef, he ate it like a stray dog. He didn't use a fork. He grabbed the meat with his trembling, bruised hands and tore into it. Harper sat in her armchair in the corner, watching him in the dim light of the bathroom vanity. The room smelled of antiseptic, his acrid sweat, and the sudden heavy scent of cooked meat. He didn't speak. He just chewed his jaw, popping his eyes dark and feral. When he finished, he licked the grease off his thumb. He looked up at her. "More," he whispered. "Tomorrow," Harper said, keeping her voice low. "If you eat too much at once, you'll throw it up, and the vomit will have meat in it." Dr. Aris checks the basin. He let his head fall back against the pillows, closing his eyes. A long, shuddering sigh escaped his lips. "You're a pragmatic girl, Harper." "I'm a broke girl," Harper corrected him. "Pragmatism is just poverty's survival mechanism." The swelling on her cheek had hardened into a sharp, dark bruise that spread from her eye to her jawline. Every time she chewed, a dull spike of pain shot through her skull. Gabriel hadn't asked about it. He didn't need to. They both knew exactly who put it there, and they both knew acknowledging it didn't change anything. The physical reality of keeping him alive stripped away any boundaries between them. There was no dignity left in that room. Harper wiped the cold sweat from his chest when the tremors hit. She held the plastic basin when his stomach cramped, and he dry heaved until blood vessels popped in his eyes. She helped him to the bathroom when his legs were too weak to hold his weight, draping his heavy burning arm over her shoulder, her ribs bruising under the pressure. He smelled like sickness, but beneath that the sharp metallic scent of the poison was fading. It was being replaced by the smell of a man. Skin salt and something darker. Gun oil. Old leather. One night during the second week of the detox, the pain in his legs got so bad he bit straight through his lower lip. Blood pooled in the corner of his mouth. Harper was sitting on the edge of the mattress, rubbing a coarse, dry towel over his calves. The friction supposedly helped the nerve pain. It was 3 a.m. "Stop!" He ground out his hand, shooting out to grab her wrist. She froze. His grip was entirely different now. 2 weeks ago, it had been a desperate, dying spasm. Tonight, his fingers were warm. The strength was returning hard and undeniable, wrapping around her forearm like a vice. She looked up at his face. The grey pallor was gone. His cheekbones were still sharp, his eyes still shadowed with exhaustion, but the hollow, skeletal look was fading. The king was rebuilding his armor. He didn't let go of her wrist. He traced the pad of his thumb over the fading yellow edge of the bruise Dante had left on her arm. "Why do you stay?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, completely stripped of the gravelly weakness. You pay well, Harper lied. I haven't paid you a dime. You've been off the official payroll since Dante fired you in the basement. Miller thinks you're only here because I'm keeping you as a human shield. She pulled her arm back gently. He let her go. If I walk out that door, Dante puts a bullet in my head. I know about the tea. I know too much. You could have gone to the police. Harper let out a short, humorless laugh. The police? Half the precinct drives cars your syndicate bought them. The other half would just hand me back to Dante for a promotion. I grew up in the Narrows, Mr. Costa. I know how the food chain works. He stared at her for a long time. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Gabriel, he said softly. What? My name. Stop calling me Mr. Costa. It makes me feel like my father. And my father was an idiot. Harper dropped the towel into the laundry basket. Okay. Gabriel. He shifted, sitting up slightly without the aid of his arms. The core strength was back. He looked toward the heavy mahogany doors, his eyes narrowing. The plateau is ending, Gabriel said, his tone shifting back to the cold, calculating whisper of a strategist. Dante is running out of patience. He came in today and he didn't bring the tea. Her stomach tightened. He didn't... No. He poured me a glass of water from the pitcher. He stood there and watched me for 3 full minutes. He knows I'm not fading, which means he's going to stop waiting for nature to take its course. What is he going to do? Gabriel looked back at her. There was no fear in his eyes, just a grim, violent anticipation. He's going to clear the board, Gabriel said. He's going to fire the doctors. He's going to put me on comfort measures. And then he's going to smother me himself. Gabriel was right. It happened the very next afternoon. Dante walked into the master suite, flanked by Miller and another guard she didn't recognize, a massive guy with a scarred throat and dead eyes. Dr. Aris was checking Gabriel's blood pressure. Dante cleared his throat. Dante said, his voice carrying a solemn manufactured grief. I've spoken with the family attorneys and the syndicate lieutenants. We've made a decision. Dr. Aris stopped pumping the cuff. Sir, Gabriel is suffering. The treatments aren't working. We are simply prolonging his agony. Dante looked at his brother, who lay perfectly still, eyes closed, playing the corpse. We are transitioning to palliative care. No more blood draws, no more steroids. I want everyone out of the East Wing. Mr. Costa, I strongly advise against. It wasn't a request, Dr. Oris. Dante cut him off, his voice, dropping an octave, turning hard as flint. Pack your bags, take your team. Miller will escort you to the gates. The doctor swallowed hard, looking at the guards. He knew better than to argue with a loaded gun. Yes, sir. Within 20 minutes, the medical equipment was powered down. The hum of the monitors, the rhythmic beeping that had been the soundtrack of her life for a month, died. The sudden silence in the room was terrifying. It felt like a tomb. Dante turned to Harper. You. Harper kept her eyes glued to her scuffed sneakers. Yes, sir. You have until midnight. Clean the room. Change the linens. Then get out of my house. If I see your face tomorrow morning, I'll have Miller cut it off. Yes, sir, Harper whispered. Dante gave Gabriel one last, long look. Then he left, locking the heavy double doors behind him. The click of the deadbolt echoed like a gunshot. Harper stood in the center of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was sweating cold, slick terror. Midnight. They had until midnight. A rustle of sheets made her turn. Gabriel was throwing off the covers. He didn't move with the slow, agonizing caution of the past 2 weeks. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and planted his bare feet flat on the Persian rug. He gripped the edge of the mattress, his knuckles whitening, and pushed. His muscles trembled, his chest heaved. But slowly, inch by painful inch, Gabriel Costa stood up. He was thinner than he used to be. The scars on his torso stood out sharply against his pale skin. But as he stood there, towering over the bed, the sheer, imposing mass of the man returned. He rolled his shoulders, a sickening crack echoing in the quiet room. "Midnight," Gabriel murmured, a dark, terrible smile touching the corners of his mouth. "He's coming at midnight." "What do we do?" Harper asked, her voice shaking. "He locked the door. Miller is outside." "Miller is a lapdog," Gabriel scoffed. He took a step forward. His right leg buckled slightly, but he caught himself on the heavy oak bedpost. He took another step, then another. He was walking. He moved to the master bathroom. Harper followed him, watching in disbelief as the dying man systematically dismantled the metal grating over the air vent near the ceiling. He reached inside his arm, disappearing up to the elbow. He pulled out a heavy black object, wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it on the marble counter. It was a Glock 19, sleek and ugly, alongside 2 loaded magazines and a matte black suppressor. "You had a gun in here the whole time," she hissed, staring at the weapon. "I have a gun in every room of this house," Gabriel said calmly. He picked up the Glock, checking the chamber with a smooth, practiced motion. The slide racked with a sharp, mechanical clack. "I'm a paranoid man, Harper. It's what keeps me breathing." He screwed the suppressor onto the barrel. He looked at his hands. They were steady. The tremors were completely gone. "He's going to come in alone," Gabriel said, leaning against the counter. "Dante has an ego. He needs to do it himself to prove he's the king. He'll send Miller down the hall, and then you shoot him. If I shoot him the second he walks through the door, half the syndicate will think I went crazy and murdered my brother unprovoked. It splinters the family. I need him to confess. I need him to attempt the murder while I'm awake." Gabriel turned to her. He stepped close, crowding her space. The heat radiating off his body was intense. "I need you to be the bait," he said. Harper stopped breathing. "What? He told you to leave by midnight. When he comes in, you need to be here. You need to be standing right next to the bed. He'll be angry. He'll be distracted by you." Gabriel reached out his warm, rough fingers, gently touching the unbruised side of her face. "I'm going to be behind the door." "He'll kill me," Harper whispered, panic rising in her throat like bile. "Gabriel, he'll just shoot me." "He won't use a gun. He wants it quiet," Gabriel said, his eyes locking onto hers, demanding her focus. "He's going to use a syringe or a pillow. He needs it to look natural. He'll grab you, but before he can hurt you, I will end it." Harper looked at the black gun resting on the marble. She thought about the basement. She thought about Dante's leather shoe, inches from her face. She realized then that she wasn't just a maid anymore. She had crossed a line the night she knocked the tea over. She took a deep breath, the smell of gun oil settling deep in her lungs. "Okay," Harper said. "Where do you want me?" 11:50 p.m. The room was pitch black. Harper hadn't turned on the lamps. She stood exactly where Gabriel had placed her, at the side of the bed, a damp washcloth in her hand. She had arranged the pillows under the heavy silk duvet to look like a body. In the dark from the doorway, it would look like Gabriel was sleeping. Gabriel was pressed flat against the wall behind the mahogany doors, the Glock held loosely at his side, his breathing completely silent. She couldn't see him, but she could feel him in the dark. A coiled spring, a predator waiting in the brush. Her heart was beating so fast, she was afraid Dante would hear it from the hallway. Her hands were shaking so badly, she had to grip the heavy wooden bedpost to keep from collapsing. 11:58 p.m. The handle of the double doors slowly turned. A sliver of light from the hallway cut across the Persian rug. The hinges, which she had oiled 2 days ago, precisely for this reason, didn't make a sound. Dante stepped into the room. He was alone. He closed the door behind him, with a soft click plunging the room back into darkness. She saw his silhouette move toward the bed. He was holding something in his right hand. A heavy down pillow from the sofa in the hallway. "I told you to be gone," Dante whispered. His voice was a venomous hiss in the quiet room. Harper didn't move. She forced herself to speak, her voice trembling naturally. "I was just finishing his bath." Dante stepped closer. "You stupid, stubborn girl. You just couldn't take a hint." He dropped the pillow onto the floor. He didn't need it for her. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a switchblade, the metal catching a faint gleam of moonlight from the window. "I'm going to cut your throat, and then I'm going to tell Miller you attacked my brother, and I had to defend him." He lunged. Harper screamed, stepping backward, tripping over her own feet. She hit the floor hard, scrambling backward against the nightstand. Dante was fast, but he was entirely focused on her. He raised the knife. "Dante!" The voice came from the shadows behind him. It was Gabriel's voice, but it wasn't the weak, broken wheeze Dante was used to. It was a deep, resonant baritone. The voice of the boss. Dante froze mid-stride. He spun around. The heavy click of the bedside lamp shattered the darkness. She had reached up and hit the switch. Light flooded the room. Gabriel stood by the door. He was barefoot, wearing only a pair of dark trousers and a white undershirt. He looked terrifying. The sickbed pallor was gone, replaced by a cold, murderous fury. He held the Glock aimed dead center at Dante's chest. Dante's face drained of color. The switchblade slipped from his fingers, clattering uselessly against the hardwood floor. Gabriel Dante breathed. His eyes darted to the bed, to the piled pillows, and back to the man standing before him. The math was breaking his brain. "How?" "A heavy metal cleanse," Gabriel said calmly, taking a slow step forward. "It hurts like hell, little brother, but it clears the mind." Dante took a step back, his hands coming up in a desperate, placating gesture. "Gabe, wait. Listen to me. The doctors, they said the infection was making you hallucinate. Shut up." Gabriel didn't yell. The quietness of the command was worse. Gabriel walked to the center of the room. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Dante. "You fed me thallium for a month," Gabriel said. "You watched me waste away. You held my hand while my nervous system burned." "It wasn't me," Dante cried, his polished arrogance completely shattering. He looked like a panicked child. "It was the rival families, the Bertinellis. They infiltrated the kitchen, I swear to God, Gabe. Harper," Gabriel said, without looking away from his brother. "Get the bag." Harper scrambled to her feet. Her knees were shaking. She crawled under the heavy leather armchair and reached beneath the dresser. She ripped the duct tape free, pulling out the plastic garbage bag. She brought it to Gabriel. Gabriel didn't take it. He gestured toward Dante with the barrel of the gun. "Open it!" She untied the plastic. The overwhelming sharp stench of bitter almonds and stale ginger hit the air immediately. Inside was the square of Persian rug, still damp, heavily stained, with the amber tea Dante had spilled days ago. Dante stared at the bag. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He knew exactly what it was. "A botanical mix," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Heavy on the almond to mask the poison. You stirred it yourself. Every morning." Gabriel stepped forward and pressed the hot barrel of the suppressor directly against Dante's forehead. Dante whimpered, his knees buckling slightly, but Gabriel grabbed him by the lapels of his suit, holding him up. "I'm going to give you a choice, Dante," Gabriel said softly. "You can scream. You can call for Miller. If he comes through that door, I shoot you in the kneecaps, I shoot him in the head, and I spend the next 3 days peeling your skin off in the basement." Dante was crying now, real ugly tears streaking down his face. "Please, Gabe, please. I'm your blood." Or, Gabriel continued, completely ignoring the plea, "You can eat it." Gabriel nodded toward the plastic bag in her hands. "You get down on your knees." Gabriel said, his voice as cold as absolute zero. "You put your mouth on that rug, and you suck every drop of that tea out of the wool. You swallow it, and we'll see how long your plateau lasts." Dante looked at the bag. He looked at the gun. He looked into his brother's eyes and saw absolutely nothing but a graveyard. Dante slowly sank to his knees. He crawled toward her. Harper stood, frozen, holding the plastic bag open. Dante looked up at her. There was no arrogance left in his slate-grey eyes. Just pathetic animal terror. He leaned forward, burying his face in the damp, poisoned wool. He gagged. He coughed, but with the suppressor hovering inches from the back of his head, Dante sucked the bitter moisture from the rug. It was the ugliest thing she had ever seen. Harper looked away, staring at the wall, listening to the wet, suffocating sounds of a man drinking his own death sentence. When he was finished, Dante collapsed onto the floor, coughing violently, spitting up brown fibers. Gabriel lowered the gun. He looked at Dante with profound, empty disgust. "Miller!" Gabriel barked. The shout echoed through the heavy doors. A moment later, the door flew open. Miller burst in his hand on his holster. He stopped dead. He looked at Gabriel standing tall and armed. He looked at Dante sobbing and vomiting on the floor. He looked at her. Miller slowly took his hand off his weapon. He was a survivor. He knew when the crown had changed heads. "Boss," Miller said, his voice tight. "My brother is unwell," Gabriel said coldly, turning his back on Dante. "He's ingested something toxic. Take him to the basement. Lock the door. Do not call a doctor. Do not give him water. If he dies, roll him in a tarp and bury him in the north woods." "Yes, boss," Miller said. He grabbed Dante by the collar of his expensive suit and dragged him out of the room. Dante didn't fight. The thallium was already hitting his empty stomach. The door clicked shut. The silence returned, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It felt clean. Gabriel set the gun on the nightstand. He leaned against the heavy oak bedpost, finally letting a long, exhausted breath escape his lungs. He looked at her. Harper dropped the plastic bag on the floor. Her hands were covered in lint and the faint smell of almonds. She was shaking. Gabriel reached into his pocket. He pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills bound in a rubber band. He tossed it onto the mattress. 3 months back rent, Gabriel said quietly, plus a bonus for the acting. She stared at the money. It was more cash than she had ever seen in her life. It was freedom. It was a new apartment. It was safety for her sister. She looked up at him. The bruises on her face throbbed. The blood on her apron was dry and stiff. "You told Dante to fire me," Harper said, her voice barely a whisper. Gabriel walked slowly toward her. He stopped a foot away. He didn't touch her, but the gravity of him pulled at her, heavy and undeniable. "I did," Gabriel said. "You aren't a maid anymore, Harper." "Then what am I?" He looked at the unbruised side of her face, his dark eyes tracing the line of her jaw, moving down to the steady pulse at her throat. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was a look of complete, unapologetic ownership. "You're the only person in this city I trust," Gabriel said softly. "Wash your hands. You're eating dinner with me tomorrow." Harper looked at the money on the bed. Then she looked at the king of the syndicate, standing in the ruins of his sick room. She had saved a monster. And the thing about saving a monster is that eventually you have to learn how to live in the dark with him. "Okay," she breathed. She turned and walked into the bathroom to wash the poison off her hands.